get to the battery, I'm going to slow it up. We're going to look at Wall Street. Can't believe this guy slipped us like this. And no newsroom knows where he's going. Jeffy, where are you? Jeff, I'm looking for you. Coming over to the East River. Okay, you're 15. Okay. Got you. Yep, got PD down low. Alright, we're going back over to the battery tunnel, boys. That first one was a decoy, I guess, huh? you.
countries around the world, but let me remind the Secretary of State, in the words of the person who perpetrated this action, Donald J. Trump, of why he committed this action. The US is going to have a presence in Venezuela as it pertains to oil. We are going to take out tremendous amount of wealth from the ground. We are going to run Venezuela. So can I ask the Foreign Secretary to take a leaf out of Donald Trump's book and answer a question once? Does the government support US colonial expansionism, or does the government believe in the rules-based world order? Which is it? It can't be both.
Yeah.
Well, the government supports democracy for Venezuela. The people of Venezuela have been denied that democracy for far too long. We should support that democracy. We should support the international law and a rules-based order, and make sure that a future government of Venezuela reflects the will of the people and respects the human rights of the Venezuelan people.
Marcus Campbell-Savers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I ask the Minister if she's reflected on the well-documented difficulties that arise when the US assumes administrative control of occupied territory, difficulties we saw all too clear during the Iraq conflict? And given these lessons, will the government press our American allies to ensure we see an early, credible election, one that enfranchises the estimated 7 million Venezuelans who emigrated during Maduro's time in office? Wouldn't this offer the most legitimate route back to democracy and spare the US the burden and risk inherent in attempting to administer another state? And doesn't this whole situation to displace autocracy demonstrate a need to establish a new consensus that updates the principles that govern the intervention in failed states?
I think the Honourable Member makes a sort of important, thoughtful point about the way in which frameworks need to work, but he is right that this needs to be the transition to democracy at the earliest opportunity. The first stages in that are ensuring there is stability, and then the release of the political prisoners, the return of political opposition members so that they can come back to Venezuela, because you cannot fight a free and fair election whilst there is still political repression in place.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have to say this is one of the most depressing days I've spent in this chamber in the past few years, because while I welcome the Foreign Secretary's commitment to democracy in Venezuela and her repeated commitment to the rules-based international system and our alliances, I cannot bring that together with this government's abject failure to condemn the actions of Donald Trump in breaking international law. And the concern that is created, reflected in statements by the leaders of Greenland, Denmark, Sweden, the Foreign Secretary herself at the dispatch box. So how is the government going to reconcile that blatant contradiction?
Well, I think set out already our clear position on Greenland, the importance of international law, but also the importance of working through our different alliances and being prepared to raise issues, be it around international law or other issues, both privately and publicly as well. And what we need to do is to ensure we can pursue the UK interests and also our values. And we do that through the discussions that will be taking place this week on Ukraine, and we do this through the pursuit of democracy and our values in Venezuela as well.
James Naish.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was reading this morning that a former Under Secretary of Defence for Readiness in the US said that he is not aware of, and I quote, any plans for how the next few days will actually be managed by the US. So can I ask the Foreign Secretary what specific reassurances she has received from US counterparts that that isn't the case, that there is a plan in place, and the work that we're doing with our international partners, particularly from NATO, to make sure that support is provided?
Well, one of the reasons that I spoke to the US Secretary Rubio yesterday was in order to be able to engage on what the plans now should be going forward. I think there obviously, given the level of criminal gang operations in Venezuela, given the different factions that there have been in Venezuela, preventing greater instability right now, making sure we can get that stable basis and a plan for democracy is immensely important. There is a very strong civil society, opposition groups and so on, but they need to be enabled and supported in order to make sure that we can get that peaceful democratic transition. It will be crucially important.
Jim Allister.
Most members of this House will agree with the government that there are no tears to be shed over the removal of the brutal regime in Venezuela. My question for the Foreign Secretary is this: does, and if so how, does such a desirable outcome impact on the government's view of what is permissible within international law?
Well, look, there is always a debate to be had about how you respond to different kinds of hybrid threats and complex threats in different countries, and there are also different interpretations that can be made. It's also why we have said, look, it is for the US to set out its interpretation and its legal basis for any action that it takes. But we continue to promote the importance of the international law as it is set out and the UN Charter. He will know there are other areas where we have argued for example, reforms to the interpretation of the ECHR, for example, other areas of international law for other reasons to modernise, but we continue to stand up for the principles of the UN Charter.
Paul Wall.
Madam Deputy Speaker, from state-sponsored assassination attempts to illegal invasions, in recent years we've seen an alarming rise in the number of countries that are behaving like rogue states, including countries that are members of the permanent members of the Security Council, and I name Russia, given what happened on British soil in Salisbury. But does she agree with me that actually the international rules-based order and international law should be a fundamental principle and practice of the UK, and that's something that we expect other countries to uphold in all circumstances?
I do completely agree with my honourable friend, and sometimes it could feel right now as if the rules-based order is under particular threat and challenge, and that was a point I raised before Christmas in the Locarno speech. I would say that I think it probably has been under challenge before, and it has endured, partly because countries like the UK have continued to advocate for it, and we must continue to do so.
Callum Miller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The people of Greenland are concerned today, and I welcome the Foreign Secretary's statement earlier that the UK bases that are used by the US Air Force will not be used for any attack on Greenland. Could she please confirm that she will make that clear to Secretary of State Rubio the next time they speak?
Let's be really clear that we are all members of NATO. The UK, Denmark, the US. That is why it is so important that we continue to ensure the sovereignty of Greenland and of Denmark, and why we have made our views on that particularly clear to the US.
Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I very much welcome the Foreign Secretary's statement this afternoon. And I would agree with her that Maduro was a corrupt dictator who frankly cared nothing for the lives of his own people. And I welcome the Foreign Secretary's comments about the importance of upholding international law. So does the Foreign Secretary agree with me that if we believe in a world order with clear rules about sovereignty, we cannot pick and choose when those rules do and do not apply? Otherwise, what is to stop others with further bad intentions from taking advantage of that situation and of following suit?
Well, again, let me say we continue to support the international law and to promote it both publicly and privately with our allies, and also to pursue the alliances and to sustain the alliances which are important as underpinning parts of the rules-based order. That does include our NATO alliance, it includes our transatlantic alliance, and we maintain those long-standing partnerships as well as part of upholding international law.
Danny Kruger.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Biden administration offered a $25 million reward for the capture and detention of President Maduro. And this country has passively supported regime change in Venezuela since we froze the gold reserves held at the Bank of England in 2019. So now that President Trump has followed through on the implicit policy of both our countries and achieved the outcome that the whole world wanted, Can the Foreign Secretary tell the House what conditions will need to be met for the money that is owned by the Venezuelan people to be returned by the Bank of England?
Well, as he rightly points out, successive governments have not recognised the Venezuelan regime. That is the basis on which the independent Bank of England took its decision. We continue not to recognise the Venezuelan regime because it's important that we have the pressure in place to have a transition to a democracy, which is also about the will of the Venezuelan people. So obviously there are independent decisions for the Bank of England to take, but our principles are about maintaining and pursuing the stability and the transition to democracy, and that is what is guiding our approach to recognition.
Dr. Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I do thank the Foreign Secretary for her statement. She's been getting lots of advice in response, but I don't think any of us really envy her position. And I thank her as well for talking to the Leader of the Opposition, Maria Corina Machado. I think it's absolutely the right thing to do. She did outline how she's spoken to Secretary of State Rubio about a transition to democracy. So I guess the key question is there any kind of timeline associated with that? And on recognition of a Venezuelan government, will that only happen once it has a democratic government actually elected?
So we don't have the timelines for this currently. And what the opposition, the Venezuelan opposition, have said is the first step has to be an end to political repression, the release of political prisoners, and also the return, the safe return to Venezuela of opposition politicians, because without that you cannot have free and fair elections. So that is the first step we are pressing for, is an end to the political repression, and that is what we are urging the transition Vice President, now acting President, to do.
Dr. Al Pinkerton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There's an old warning from Benjamin Franklin. If you do not hang together, you will hang separately. Given the events in recent days in Venezuela, given the active threats against Cuba and Mexico, and in the past Canada and today Greenland, can I ask the Foreign Secretary, where is the line? What is the Rubicon now for the United Kingdom the crossing of which that would force us to recognise that our silence today will only lead to greater challenge tomorrow? And is it not time that we hang together with our values-based allies to stand up against Trump's colonial possession-taking in Central America, whether or not it's in the Western Hemisphere or elsewhere?
Yeah. Well, I think, the equivalence across different countries is the wrong approach to take. I think that also does not recognise the scale of damage done by the Maduro regime, and also that what we need to do in order to promote international law is also to promote some of the partnerships that underpin it. It's why we need to work closely, not just with the coalition of the willing that is meeting tomorrow to discuss Ukraine, but also to ensure that there are US security guarantees, which is an important part of our security alliance with the US, and also that on Greenland we and other European countries have made our position clear.
Iqbal Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The unstoppable machine of American imperialist invasions has killed millions in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya and Syria, from aiding and arming and abetting a genocide in Palestine to now the invasion and abduction of a leader in Venezuela for oil, minerals, gold, and to protect the petrodollar. This has nothing to do with democracy or narco-terrorism. With ongoing threats to Greenland, Cuba, Colombia and Mexico, the list of gangsterish aggression continues unopposed. Has the global rule-based order now collapsed, or did it ever even exist for Western warmongering powers?
Well, I just strongly disagree with the honourable member's characterisation. We have a strong security partnership with the US. and with other countries, not just through NATO, but also a direct security partnership, and the US is our strongest security ally. But that alliance is also based on values and based on principles as well. We build that relationship, or we continue to sustain that relationship as part of our support for and continued respect for international law.
Martin Wrigley.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. What message does the Foreign Secretary think that this weekend's outbreak of unilateral acts of violent kidnap and taking assets outside of international law sends to Vladimir Putin, in particular with reference to Russia's view of the need to seriously negotiate peace with Ukraine? Will the Foreign Secretary confer with her Ukrainian counterparts about giving our Ukrainian guests the option for a right to settle in the UK? And will the Minister meet with me and Ukrainian guests to discuss options moving forward?
Well, I just think fundamentally it is wrong to make any kind of equivalence between what is happening in Venezuela and what is happening in Ukraine. It's these fundamentally different, and the US is playing a hugely important role in pursuing a peace process for Ukraine and also in the discussions around security guarantees, which again is immensely important. He raises the issue of Ukrainians living in the UK. As he well may know, we have a Ukrainian family continuing to live with us, and I take this issue extremely importantly. He will also then recognise, however, this is now a matter for the Home Secretary and not for me as the Foreign Secretary.
Sammy Wilson.
Speaker, the Secretary of State is right that no one should shed any tears at the end of Maduro's rule. Would it surprise her that Sinn Féin, first of all, defended the fraudulent election as being electorally robust and then attended the inauguration event for the President in order to show what they said, solidarity with him, highlighting once again how they're still wedded to criminality and to terrorism. But there's an opportunity now that the Americans have done good for the Venezuelan people by removing the corrupt cancer which so damaged their country. Can she outline what steps can our country take to ensure that democracy is restored in Venezuela? And from her discussions with the Americans, how much will they cooperate with us in that venture?
I think no one should be defending the Maduro regime. I've talked specifically to the US Secretary of State about the transition to democracy. The US have said that this is important, but we need to make sure that those conditions are in place, starting with the ending of political repression.
Cameron Thomas.
President Maduro was illegitimate, but Donald Trump's illegal incursion into Venezuela puts him in the company of Vladimir Putin and will embolden President Xi's ambitions for Taiwan. More pressing for the UK is that a repeatedly threatened occupation of Greenland would see Putin's ambition for NATO's disintegration come to pass. Given that there are numerous US assets in the UK, what discussions has the government had with our European counterparts, including the Danes, to prepare European security against the threat now posed and explicitly stated by the President of the United States?
I really just have to say to the honourable member, trying to make equivalence between the US and Russia is just ridiculous. It's totally ridiculous and deeply, deeply inappropriate. A country where we have seen the Russian invasion of Ukraine and also the kidnapping of Ukrainian children, and in contrast, our relationship with the US, in which they are discussing now security guarantees for Ukraine. I think that's hugely important.
Ayub Khan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Absent international rule-based order leads to chaos, and we all know that within chaos there is order, and sadly, that order is where the strongest survive and the most vulnerable and weak die, neither just nor morally right. So I ask the Foreign Secretary, how can we be both champions and advocates for international rules-based order, yet wholly equivocal when it comes to calling out this flagrant breach of international law?
Well, we have set out our continued commitment to international law and also the importance of maintaining some of the underpinning alliances, rules-based alliances that are so important for sustaining the rules-based order. It's why we will continue to argue for international law and also to continue to maintain things like the NATO alliance and the partnership, and why we will continue to raise these issues both publicly and privately with our allies.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The President Trump's actions are not about drugs, they are about oil. They are not about regional stability, they are about regional dominance. And they are not about upholding the law, they are about breaking it. The Foreign Secretary has said that the government has been clear, but she has not been clear on any of those 3 points. The world has changed this weekend, and it will change again very quickly. So can the Foreign Secretary say whether there is a single strategic decision or practical step that this government has taken in the last 72 hours to shore up our national security or that of our allies, especially Denmark?
Well, we've got discussions going on the coalition of the willing, the preparations for them as we speak, the discussions being taken tomorrow. Those are all about strengthening our national security as part of strengthening Ukraine's national security.
Adnan Hussein.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Foreign Secretary repeatedly emphasises the government's commitment to international law. I, as I'm sure with many of my colleagues across the House, remain confused as to the Foreign Secretary's position in respect of President Trump's actions in Venezuela, whether they were in line with international law, and whether she believes breaching a nation's sovereignty is indeed a breach of international law and order. It could simply be a yes or a no.
Well, as I have said, we won't shed a tear for Maduro and for his deeply damaging regime. It is for the US to set out the legal basis of their actions, which we were not involved in. We will promote now the democratic transition, which is something we have continually argued for as part of the policies that we have set out over many years on Venezuela, and we will continue to stand up for international law.
Josh Babarindi.
Madam Deputy Speaker, throughout this statement, the Foreign Secretary appears to have taken comfort in the UK not having been involved in the US's illegal attack in Venezuela. But the Foreign Secretary cannot escape the reality that for as long as this government fails to call out Trump for his actions, this government is complicit in his demolition of the international rules-based order. So when will the government put its head above the parapet in the spirit of the likes of Charles Kennedy back in 2003 and condemn the US president's attempt to turn our world into his Wild West?
Well, again, I would say to the honourable member that he shouldn't make false equivalents in different situations, and that would be inappropriate to do so. We will continue to work with the US in the discussions this week on the defence of Ukraine, which is in itself about maintaining international law and the rules-based order, just as we will also continue to raise issues around international law in our private discussions with them and in public debates as well.
Ms Coughlin.
Madam Deputy Speaker, few of us regret the departure of Maduro, but many of us are alarmed by the breach of international law. But I am most alarmed by Trump's concurrent threat to Greenland and his previous threat to Canada. The Foreign Secretary says that she likes to deal with the world as it is. So precisely how many NATO allies does Donald Trump have to threaten until the government recognises that Donald Trump is a clear threat to the survival of liberal democracy in the 21st century?
We are working with the US administration on support for Ukraine, which is about support for a democratic sovereign state that has been threatened by and invaded by an authoritarian Russian regime. And it is the US that is pursuing peace, that is also discussing security guarantees for Ukraine. So I really do think his characterisation of the world we are in is just wrong.
James McCleary.
Madam Deputy Speaker. There has been widespread speculation in recent days, and hours in fact, about a possible US operation to seize a tanker which previously operated in Venezuela, which the United States has been pursuing, is now off the Irish coast. Any such operation would very likely involve UK air bases. What steps is the government taking to ensure that any deployments of US forces from UK bases, whether in relation to this tanker or other targets it may define in Europe, are in full compliance with international law?
So we always ensure that any action that the UK takes is in compliance with international law. He will know that we don't, that those are issues for the Ministry of Defence also takes immensely seriously issues around international law as well, and it is for them to comment on the way in which international law is applied.
Solomon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, at the weekend Donald Trump invoked the Monroe Doctrine. From her statement, the Foreign Secretary seems to accept that the UN Charter is secondary to great power spheres of influence in some cases. So what criteria does she use to decide when the Charter is trumped by 19th century thinking? And she's talked a lot about alliances today. The great game of alliances in the 19th century ended very, very badly.
Well, that is why the alliances that we stand up for today are ones that are based on our values and long-standing rules and relationships. That is what the NATO alliance is. It is based on our values and is immensely important. I'm not sure if he is saying he disagrees with the NATO alliance. That's been the cornerstone of our security for a very long time.
John Milne.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This government has bent over backwards not to criticise President Trump directly. But that only makes him think he can get away with more and more. If President Trump really does invade Greenland, it's the end of NATO, the end of the special relationship. So will the Foreign Secretary accept that the best way for us to protect Greenland today is to explicitly say that President Trump is indeed acting outside international law?
Again, I think he wants to treat equivalents in a whole series of different situations. We have been very clear about our view on Greenland.
The final question in this statement, Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I definitely have the strongest legs in this chamber. I've been bobbing for over 3 hours. Can I thank the Secretary of State very much for her statement and for her strong commitment as well. But will the Secretary of State further outline what support we can offer our US allies to ensure that democracy is restored or indeed it is created in Venezuela? That nation has great potential to do so much good. And further, what support can our UK government offer to secure the daily needs of so many young people who have been ignored for many, many years and left in poverty for far, far too long? Thank you.
I think he is right about the future of Venezuela and the future for these Venezuelan people, including young people in Venezuela who have been pushed into hardship, into poverty by the corruption of the regime and by the criminality of the regime. There is an opportunity now, but it is fragile. It is very fragile. We have to ensure that we can support stability in Venezuela and this transition to democracy, which is so crucial. Those are the points we will continue to make as part of our discussions with the US, and also that is the work that our embassy on the ground will continue to do.
And that concludes the statement on Venezuela. I'd like to thank the Foreign Secretary who's taken over 90 questions and who's been on her feet for 2¼ hours. Thank you. We now move on to the next statement, which is the Middle East and North Africa. And if I can give the front benches just a few moments to swap round. Statement, Minister Hamish Faulkner.
Madam Deputy Speaker, there have been a number of developments in the Middle East that I'd like to update the House on, including Gaza, Iran, Yemen and Syria. I'd also like to take the opportunity to provide an update on the case of Alaa el-Fatah, which has been a subject of debate during the parliamentary recess. Beginning with Gaza, the humanitarian situation remains desperate. Even with the ceasefire, 500,000 people are struggling to find enough food. 100,000 people are in catastrophic conditions. The peace plan was clear. The Israeli government agreed to let aid in without interference through the UN and other international organisations. At the same time, Hamas must disarm, their weapons must be decommissioned, and they must allow a path to lasting security for Palestinians. More trucks are entering Gaza, and this is very welcome. But right now, key crossings remain closed, convoys are being turned back, medical and shelter supplies are blocked, and NGOs are being banned. We join 9 other countries in stating that this is not acceptable over the recess. The peace plan cannot work if NGOs are shut out. Israel's decision to ban 37 of them is unjustifiable. Furthermore, many trucks entering Gaza carry commercial goods which face fewer barriers than humanitarian aid. This means, perversely, it is currently easier to get cigarettes and luxury goods into Gaza than the basic medicines and shelter that people so desperately need. Too much aid is still stuck at Gaza's borders. Thousands of tents and shelter supplies funded by the UK are waiting to get in. Families are sheltering from winter floods and storms under rubble. They are suffering from hypothermia and sewage running in the streets. This is unforgivable. We have not wavered in our commitment to help. This financial year, we're providing £116 million for humanitarian and other aid, healthcare, food, clean water and sanitation, including treatment for 800,000 Palestinians through UK Med. The UK formally recognised Palestine last autumn to protect the viability of a two-state solution and create a path towards lasting peace for the Israeli and Palestinian people. We welcome the establishment of full diplomatic relations with the State of Palestine, and I can confirm the establishment of a Palestinian embassy in London today. Let me now turn to Iran, where we've seen protests enter a 9th day following the rapid depreciation of the currency. We are disturbed by reports of violence against those who are courageously exercising their right to peaceful protest. We are monitoring developments closely, and we urge Iran to protect fundamental freedoms, including access to information and communications. The UK was integral to the delivery of the Iran Human Rights Resolution adopted by the UN Third Committee in November. It called on Iran to halt its human rights violations, including in relation to women and girls, ethnic and religious minorities, and of course, to stop the use of the death penalty. We will continue to work with partners to hold Iran to account for its rights record. I know that many in this House will also be thinking about Craig and Lindsay Foreman, who spent Christmas in detention in Iran. We are deeply concerned that they have been charged with espionage. We're focused on supporting them and their family, and we remain in regular contact with the Iranian authorities. The Foreign Secretary raised their case with the Iranian Foreign Minister on the 19th of December. I also wish to provide the House an update on another consular case that has been in the spotlight for many years, Alaa El-Fateh. Supporting British nationals overseas is at the heart of the work of the Foreign Office, and the provision of that consular support is based on the circumstances of the case. Following Mr. El-Fateh's registration as a British citizen in 2021, successive governments gave him consular support and made it a priority to argue for his release. That is why it was welcomed by ministers across the government and many others in this House when he was released from detention in September and reunited with his family in the UK on Boxing Day. However, we recognise and share the deep concern felt across the country following the subsequent emergence of extremely disturbing historical social media posts by Mr. El-Fateh. Let me emphasise once again that the historical posts were abhorrent, and I join my colleagues in condemning them wholeheartedly. It is right that Mr. El-Fateh has apologised. I fully recognise the profound distress these posts have caused, in particular to the Jewish community in this country, especially in the context of rising anti-Semitism and recent horrific attacks against Jewish people, both in this country and around the world, and I very much regret that. The Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary and I were all unaware of those historical posts, as were the civil servants working on the case. The Foreign Secretary has therefore asked the Permanent Under-Secretary to urgently review the Department's systems for conducting due diligence on high-profile consular and human rights cases to ensure that all necessary lessons are learned. The Foreign Secretary has undertaken to update the Foreign Affairs Select Committee on the changes that the Department will put in place. I turn now to the dramatic developments in Yemen, which we are monitoring closely. I welcome calls by Yemen's president for dialogue in the south. I welcome too Saudi Arabia's offer to host a conference and the United Emirates' call for de-escalation. A swift diplomatic resolution will best serve the Yemeni people. We remain committed to supporting Yemen's unity, including the Yemeni Presidential Leadership Council and the Government of Yemen, as we set out in the recent UK-led UN Security Council statement. I, the Foreign Secretary and the National Security Advisor have all been in regular contact with our partners in Yemen, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates about the situation. We will continue to work closely with them. We must not forget that Yemen already faces one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. 18.1 million people are facing acute food insecurity. I saw it for myself in November when I visited clinics supported by the UK in Aden. Responding to this crisis is a priority for the UK, with the largest donor to the Yemen Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan, maintaining our commitment to £139 million in humanitarian aid this financial year. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me turn to Syria, where the past year has seen remarkable change. The Syrian government has shown commitment to tackling security threats, joining the global coalition against Daesh and committing to dismantle Assad's chemical weapons stockpiles. In my engagements with the Syrian government, I have heard directly a commitment to build a Syria for all Syrians. But despite this progress, the challenges remain immense. There have been outbreaks of sectarian violence in the last year, most recently in Latakia at the end of December. The recent attack on US soldiers in Palmyra is a reminder of the enduring Daesh threat. A stable Syria is firmly in the UK's interest, reducing the risk of irregular migration, terrorism, and other threats to our national security. That is why we have stepped up our engagement and support to Syria over the last year. The UK remains an active partner in the global coalition against Daesh, and on the 3rd of January, the RAF conducted a joint strike with France on an underground Daesh facility north of Palmyra. The UK will continue to do what is necessary to prevent a Daesh resurgence and support Syria's stability and protect UK national security. Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope this update on developments in the Middle East over recess is helpful to the House. His Majesty's Government remains committed to playing its full role in the Middle East.
Foreign Secretary Jane Pretty-Patel.
Deputy Speaker, Britain's place in the world matters, and this side of the House is clear that our influence should be used to its fullest to support efforts to combat the complex and dangerous conflicts and tensions that we speak too often about when it comes to the Middle East in this House. From Israel to Gaza, Iran, Syria and Yemen, the UK can and should be able to make a difference. On Iran, on these benches, we stand with the brave Iranians in their fight for freedom against a terrorist-supporting, despotic and oppressive government. Yeah. Their fight for freedom must prevail. So can I ask the Minister what discussions are taking place with our partners in the region over the actions that can be taken to stop the regime's cruel and barbaric acts against those campaigning for freedom? Iran threatens our own domestic security by continuing with its nuclear weapons program, providing weapons and drones to Russia, its backing of China and repression in Hong Kong. Britain must send them a clear signal by imposing more sanctions on them, taking action to stop the sanctions busting that takes place through cryptocurrencies and other methods that facilitate and bankroll this tyrannical regime. Can I ask why the government and its ministers, in his statement today, have been silent specifically on those issues? And where is the plan now to keep Britain safe from Iran? And what is being done to secure the immediate release from Iran's cruel captivity of Lindsay and Craig Foreman, the two British nationals who tragically are still in captivity? I appreciate that he refers to the call that took place on the 19th of December, but what practical measures are being done? On Gaza, Hamas continues to breach the ceasefire in Gaza. They have refused to release the body of the remaining Israeli hostage, Ran Gildi, which has been in terrorist captivity for over 820 days. Can I ask the Minister what pressure is being put on Hamas to adhere to the terms of the ceasefire, to disarm and bring Ran back to his family? Will he also confirm, and he's mentioned this on aid, that 4,200 trucks are being delivered in aid to Gaza each week in accordance with the 20-point peace plan, and that is being overseen by COGAT and the CMCC? Is he meeting with CMCC and COGAT to see the operational delivery of this aid and the role that the United States is playing in securing this aid delivery? And on the licensing of NGOs, can the Minister confirm that the number of agencies that have been through the licensing programme, how many have been, and what contribution are they now making? We know and we understand, and we've heard so much in recent weeks and months about terrorists infiltrating aid agencies and diverting aid. So what discussions has he had with ministers within the Israeli government as well and his counterparts to work with them to find practical solutions that address the serious concerns that have been raised so that more aid can get through and is not compromised to terrorists? On reforms to the Palestinian Authority, why is the government still backing them with taxpayers' money while they continue with the pay-to-slay programme? And when will this practice stop? Turning to Yemen, I agree with the Minister's comments made about Yemen and the conflict and the humanitarian suffering. Every single successive government has worked tirelessly to secure more aid and to support our global efforts when it comes to the suffering in Yemen. But what direct discussions has the Minister had with the UAE and Saudi Arabia, who are both long-standing partners and players, particularly over the recent dispute and tensions that have taken place? And is there a bridging role that Britain can play here? And what planning is underway with our partners in the region to respond to further threats from the Houthis? And on Syria, the targeted actions on Daesh were absolutely essential. But there are still many concerns about the stability when it comes to Syria. When will progress be made when it comes to tackling the sectarian violence, protecting minority rights, delivering the democratic transition? What quantity of chemical weapons has been disposed of? What measures are being taken to stop the criminality, the gangs, the drugs and the weapons? And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, on the Al Fatah case, I welcome the way in which the FCDO in particular has now instigated this inquiry. Can I ask when this inquiry will be completed in terms of what has happened? Was the government informed by any other government departments in terms of the views that were expressed? And I recognise what the Minister has said thus far. And will the ministers in particular, probably now in the Home Office, pick this case up and work fast to strip him of his citizenship, as this side of the House has been requesting over the recent recess period?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I can confirm that I have been in touch with my counterparts in both the UAE and Saudi Arabia, and indeed spoke to the Yemeni Foreign Minister this morning. We are in intensive discussions with all of our partners in the region on the questions in Yemen, which are very significant. I did not speak about the Houthis, but they remain a very significant threat, and I saw some of that threat during my visit to Yemen in November. In relation to Syria, I thank her for her spirit of cross-party cooperation on the strikes that we conducted. There remain very significant questions which are outstanding about the security of Syria, which I'm sure she and other members of the House will have been tracking. The violence in the end of December is indeed concerning. There has been progress on a range of questions. We need to see the independent reviews that were conducted into the violence, both in the coastal areas and in the south, followed through, including accountability measures, and I have made those points, as has the Foreign Secretary, directly to our Syrian counterparts. She asked the important questions about chemical weapons. I'm very pleased that there is now an OPCW programme engaged to ensure the destruction of chemical weapons. That will be of real interest to this House, given the extent to which chemical weapons in Syria have been discussed here even before the time I was elected, and that is welcome progress and important for regional security. On Iran, she is right to highlight the bravery of the protesters. She will have seen, I'm sure, also our spokesperson's statement over the course of the last few days, and indeed the remarks I have just made. We are speaking, of course, to our partners in the region. We are careful in the way we discuss matters in Iran. It is absolutely obvious that some in the leadership of Iran wish to portray these protests as being externally animated. Of course they are not. This is a response from the Iranian people themselves. In relation to Mr. Al-Fattah and the next steps, he was, as she knows well, provided citizenship by the previous government. That is not something that is stripped lightly. She would have seen the remarks of the Home Secretary during Home Office all questions earlier during the day. In terms of the timeline of the review, we intend it to be swift. We want to draw a line under this matter as quickly as we can and ensure that in all other cases, appropriate lessons are being learned. In relation to aid, aid in Gaza, I'd like to be clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are talking here about charities like Oxfam and Save the Children, credible charities supported by the British public who have donated generously over the course of Christmas. There has, of course, been concerns in relation to aid in Gaza. We have ensured wherever they have been raised, they have been investigated, but we should not let that take away from the credibility of the organisations involved. It is vital that those aid agencies are able to work. 30% of Gazans cannot afford basic food. She is right to say that there has been an increase in the aid going into Gaza, but it is not yet in line with the 20-point plan. Still, UN truck shipments are going in less numbers than was agreed. I think the numbers of 250 aid trucks from the UN going in a day, only 147 are going in. It is welcome that commercial goods are getting into Gaza, but as I said in my statement, it is vital that it is the life-saving humanitarian aid, in particular tents and medicines, that get it.
Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his statement this afternoon. And I entirely agree with him that at a time when the humanitarian crisis in Gaza remains so desperately urgent, that the decision by the Israeli government to withdraw accreditation from 37 aid agencies, 37 extremely credible aid agencies such as Caritas Internationalis, ActionAid and the International Rescue Committee, is an act of cruelty. And will the Minister therefore join with me in condemning this decision and urge Israel in the strongest possible terms to rescind it immediately before more deaths are occurring in Gaza and the West Bank because of the lack of the humanitarian aid that we need? And will he also urge them to open up the Rafah crossing as a matter of extreme urgency?
I thank my honourable friend for the question. We have engaged extensively with the Israeli government, both on the importance of overturning, both against the NGO registration provisions when they were announced, against the deregistration process that she describes, and we have also called repeatedly for the opening of the Rafah crossing as well as other vital crossings.
Callum Miller, Lib Dem spokesperson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thanks to the Minister for advance sight of his statement. I regret the Government is presenting developments on 4 significant states in one statement, but I'll do my best to respond in the time afforded to me. While the attention of the world is seized by the illegal actions of the US President, it is crucial that the UK works closely with our allies to support just, lawful and humanitarian action in the Middle East. After 2 years of widespread destruction, people in Gaza are already facing severe shortages of food, clean water and medical supplies in the midst of winter. What immediate action is the government taking to persuade Israel to reverse its decision to bar reputable international aid agencies from Gaza and the West Bank? The continued expansion of settlements on Palestinian land by Netanyahu's extremist cabinet since the House last met is explicitly intended to undermine any prospect of a two-state solution. So will the government implement immediate sanctions on members of the Israeli cabinet, a full ban on the import of settlement goods, and finally publish its response to the 2024 ICJ ruling that Israel's occupation is illegal under international law? Liberal Democrats condemn the violent repression of public demonstrations in Iran. The casual threats from the US President to take unilateral military action merely serve to escalate tensions. So how is our government working with European and regional partners to coordinate lawful external pressure on Iran? And when will the government commit to prescribing the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps under UK law? The people of Yemen desperately need peace, yet regional powers continue to intervene to support the armed factions. So will the government review all arms export licences to Saudi Arabia and UAE to ensure that UK weapons are not enabling them to sustain the conflict? The UN estimate that around 24 million Yemenis desperately need food and protection. How is the UK ensuring that humanitarian aid reaches those most in need, particularly in areas where access is restricted or contested? The Liberal Democrats support limited multilateral strikes against Daesh in Syria to ensure the eradication of their infrastructure and to counter their dangerous and violent ideology in the Middle East. Can the Minister confirm that the government is confident these recent strikes were fully compliant with international law and proportionate to the threat? And what steps is the government taking to ensure the new Syrian government is protecting the rights of all, including minorities and women?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Liberal Democrat spokesperson for the spirit of the question. To address why I put so many developments into the statements, there were so many developments that I wish to update the House at the earliest opportunity and provide colleagues an opportunity to ask questions on any element of it. We will continue to voice our position in relation to the absolute vital importance of the right to assembly in Iran and indeed a right to communications as well, and we will continue to do that alongside our partners and indeed in our own voice as well. I am confident and can assure the House that the strikes on Iran were consistent and compliant with international law. We, as I said to the Shadow Foreign Secretary, we continue to raise the importance of accountability in relation to violence in Syria with the Syrian government. In relation to developments in Yemen, particularly on questions of aid, there is, I'm afraid, a very significant divergence between the ability of the UK to deliver aid in the areas controlled by the Houthis and the areas not controlled by the Houthis. The Houthis have continued to seize aid workers and indeed aid premises. It is simply not possible under these circumstances to have an aid operation which operates at the scale of the needs of the Yemeni people. I call again on the Houthis, as I have repeatedly, to release all those they've detained, to leave those officers and to abide by humanitarian principles. If they do not, it is simply not possible for the UK or indeed any other humanitarian actor